and the Ministry of Education to provide, better support, for each other at this point in time.
Okay, but could you give me an example of maybe some of the positives that you would have heard from your parents or members of your association, and anything positive that might have come out?
Yes, certainly we saw where schools started having virtual graduations, and that is something we would want to see continued. And also, we would certainly like to see the virtual fun days, both outings, career fairs, and science fairs, and so on. Those are some of the positive things, we would like to see. That interaction, we form that virtual day of where students and teachers, where we can have various speakers coming. Now, one parent spoke, had at a particular school, had someone come in to speak about, from WASA, to speak about water. And that is a young student that did not listen to her mother in terms of drinking more water. But having somebody coming from water to speak about water, then decided, look, I need to drink eight glasses of water per day. So there are a lot of positive things that we can do as parents and teachers to make life a little easier and less burdensome at this point in time of virtual learning. And
That's an
I do agree, yeah, I do agree that the blended approach, there's no going back to face alone. The blended teaching is here, and we have to adjust to it as parents and teachers. We have to look and to collaborate in a way that we can maximize and get the true potential out of our children.
The virtual graduation is an excellent point. I know we wouldn't have any problem with seating. So, Mr. Brooms, any perspectives to add to this on positivity with respect to innovations?
Yes, Phaedra. Teachers have always made resources, and if teachers were to be paid for the resources they made, be millionaires. But teachers have stepped up to make resources that are relevant for virtual learning. I have been blown away, especially from infant teachers, because they need to get concepts over the internet to these, young children. I have seen some truly amazing things. So that's one area. And then we had the issue with copyright, where teachers couldn't display material because of the license and so on. And teachers were able to create their own original content.
Really?
Amazing that after, there was a lot of uproar about it, how are we going to teach? But teachers are generally very innovative. So they found ways to create original content. And on the social side, what I saw is a lot more collaboration. So when you have your own classroom in the physical setting, you may not need to collaborate as much as now, but I have seen teachers coming together to collaborate to get things done that they were not able to do before. So COVID is not all bad. We've had a lot of positives.
That is fabulous to hear. That content creation, I'm sure Dr. Nkosi would agree with me on this, that is a bottleneck in a lot of instructional success. Because if you look at what we need in the Caribbean, right? If you were to get perhaps software to teach children how to read, or anything with literacy, it's coming out of a different context. You're going to learn a different accent. When we have material produced by us, for us, this is when the technology can now learn from that. So I'm very, very interested in hearing more about that, because as scientists, computer scientists, we hear data and we smile. So that's excellent to hear.
Dr. Mohammed, I have one burning thing I want to say one more time.
Please do.
The suggestion came in terms of Mr. Brooms mentioned about the issue of copyright. We would want to recommend, some kind of a deal with the booksellers where teachers could create better packages, you know, for students without infringing on the copyright laws. Because, for instance, a school in the Southland, the grandparent indicated out of a class of 22, only 2 children had access to a device. So those other children, those other 20 children, they depended on the packages. And the issue of copyright and infringing on photocopying textbooks and so on came into play. So if the booksellers are listening and could understand how they can work together with the Ministry of Education to assist teachers in that regard.
Yes, that's an important point. The copyright issue, it's only when you're in something that it's kind of hits home. So then when you become a content developer yourself, that's when you truly appreciate. So hopefully this would now sensitize a lot more people about, you know, this whole, you know, different world of publishing and protecting intellectual property. So thank you for that perspective. It's very important to be aware of the realism, the reality on the ground. If any of the other panelists wish to chime in here, you're most welcome to do so. And viewers, keep your comments and questions streaming in. I see Dr. Nkosi has unmuted, so please go ahead.
No, because I just wanted to say that there were positives in higher education too. As you would recall, we got lecturers to transition from face-to-face to, well, we call it emergency remote teaching, but they were online in a week. When before, if you told a lecturer to convert your course to an online course, it would be like, you know. So to me, that was a positive because at least it helped people realize that, hey, this thing is not as bad as I thought, or, you know, and oriented people to the possibilities. And that's the will. And we always need to start with the will. So that for me is a positive. It was also a challenge, yeah, but.
It was it was a good challenge. You know, this is being recorded. So yeah, it was a good challenge. But in all honesty, the change is never easy. And if you look at any child when they have to grow, I think about what it takes for a body to grow teeth, to stretch their limbs, to be able to process thoughts and speak. I mean, it's not easy. They cry a lot. Maybe that's why. But this is really a good opportunity for us to, you know, help each other with the changes. As I have you here, Dr. Nkosi, perhaps you can comment on if anything within our current efforts might become permanent. What do you see some of those as being, and what benefits can you perhaps, you know, foresee for us? At least from a research or theoretical perspective, I'm putting in that, you know, clause for you.
Well, I kind of alluded to it in my presentation, because for me now, I am seeing for the future normal, we will at least, even if people don't remain fully online, there will be that blended approach where there will be a mix of face-to-face and online. You're seeing the signs already. And it's just in terms of where the blend will be more heavily placed, if there's going to be more face-to-face and less online or vice versa. But for me, that is definitely, because the trend was towards blended learning even before COVID, but at a slow pace. But now that people have been introduced to it, I can see that happening, particularly since of the affordances of blended learning. That ability to, once you deal with the digital divide, the ability to have greater access over a wider area, the ability to transition more easily from that format to a fully online format, and the affordances that would allow for in terms of competitiveness if you're in higher education, or increasing access at the lower levels. So for me, it would be that shift to blended, which I see will definitely happen, a greater shift to blended, and in some cases online, and the definite affordances that those offer, not only in terms of the wider access and all that, but the fact that, as I said, the skills and abilities that they need to participate in blended and online learning are some of the skills and capabilities that they need to take us through future life, to live future life. Those are the skills that we need. Technological skills, creative skills, to develop the tools you're all talking about, the ability to be focused, all those things we need. So those to me are some of the benefits.
Very, very well said. I have some comments coming in from our principal. The thought of being hung in a fortnight concentrates the mind wonderfully on COVID-induced change. Ask any student how do they work towards their assignment deadlines? They will tell you very close to it. So sometimes you know the change is so drastic that it might be some of the only the things that we need to get movement. There's also another interesting perspective that our dean, Dr. Coburn, just sent via chat. Remote teaching also raises the risk of smaller institutions falling behind and becoming outposts of larger universities. And this is observed in many different domains. I mean, if you look at what manufacturing has done to agriculture, right? Many of you know, those niche markets that would be produced by small farmers, once you get large scale production or automation involved, you sort of level out that uniqueness. So those smaller institutions, they are also at a major crossroad, if you want to see. So thank you for those points. Maybe the questions from our viewers will stream in after, because I'm told that, you know, people tend to look at things after, but that's okay. We were having a fine time right now. Dr. Descartes, so you brought up many unique developmental challenges that this particular twist of 2020 has now put on us. And you mentioned some of them in your talk regarding how these can be mitigated. If you had to sum it up, what would you say would be some of the most important things that parents and, you know, guardians can do when it comes to understanding what our children really need?
Okay, I want to start by saying we are also social beings, and that's very important. And children need social interaction, whether it be virtually, face-to-face, we need social interaction. But having said that, we are in the midst of a pandemic. And I remember a colleague always telling me, you cannot waste the pandemic. And what they mean by that, we have to use alternative means. And we hear from Dr. Turaben Kosi, the other speakers, also alluding to some of the positive things. But how can we mitigate? If this pandemic, of course, as we know, we're not sure how long this will last. One of the things that we see our children may not be gaining during this time is that how they learn soft skills. So some of the things we need to do is to ensure that while it may not be done within the formal curriculum, but things that are usually done in the hidden curriculum, yes, we're going to put a lot of pressure on parents to do that, but this is now your time to teach your children a lot more things. You have maybe a lot more time with your children at home. Teach them the soft skills, the empathy, that creativity and integrity that we often see probably more so in the hidden curriculum. So these are some of the things that in terms of the positive that comes out. Perhaps this pandemic is actually calling us to our students or our children with necessary coping strategies to deal with stress or any sort of adversity. I remember another colleague telling me that, you know, you often tell children about those fairy tales, and you lived happily ever after. And that in itself is like a myth. This is not the time to tell your child, yes, life comes with its challenges, but how do we overcome these challenges? And that is why it's important. This is not the time to teach them those coping skills, reactive, proactive ways, more proactive ways that can benefit children, and forming that protective factors against any sort of harmful effects of stress. I think I would say, I think that's where, in terms of mitigating, I would be at, in terms of talking about how can these be mitigated. So I don't know if anything, I missed out anything, but that's where I'm at with it in terms of what can be done. Yeah, okay.
You're good.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really is important for us to use the word pivot here as many times as we like. I probably should have put that in my introduction with virtual pivots, but say what. Diana, I'd like to bring you in now regarding technology and the challenge of assessments. So if you ask any kid again, what do you have to do for school? I have something due. I have some assessments. I have something to do. Can you now share your thoughts regarding the struggle that we face now regarding honesty and collusion? So there are two main schools of thought, generally, where one perspective would be the only way you can test is in person, and it has to be done with you know, an invigilator to the front, someone looking on, and you know, I can see, yeah, that's you. That's one perspective. Another perspective is, well, this is reality. This is how things are. This is what we're dealing with. Include that within your assessment mechanism, students will in fact collaborate and just build your assessments to suit. So I'd like to throw that out to Diana and also to Dr. Nkosi after. So I see Diana's unmuted, so please go ahead.
Okay, hi. So I think for assessment, we need to look both at the types of assessment. So if we look at Bloom's taxonomy, we can't really test knowledge by asking students to submit questions that test facts and knowledge. We have to look at the higher levels of thinking. So analysis, the evaluation, creation of material. So our assessment now changes. So we need to change the skills that we are teaching. And secondly, instead of simply looking always for output for the solution for an assignment, we need to keep track of the process that students are doing when they're learning. So those tools that can track collaboration, working on with each other, the questions they pose, the questions they answer, throughout the course, throughout assignments, throughout projects. From this process, if we can somehow record how each student in your class are progressing, that is a new and a better way, I think, of assessing really, can this person critically think and critically understand, provide solutions, problem solve on a particular topic or a particular field that we're teaching them. So I think that's the way assessment needs to go. It's a bit tougher because we're not looking simply for you to reproduce facts and knowledge, because you can simply Google it. But we're looking to see, what can you do with it? Do you really understand it? Can you manipulate it in a way that makes sense? So I think that's the way we need to go with assessment.
Well said, Diana. Dr. Nkosi, anything to add to that?
Well, to piggyback on that, I would say that if we're talking about transforming the system, And I'm agreeing with Dana here that your assessments are tied to your learning outcomes and you're looking at your taxonomies and so. But if you are thinking of shifting your system from one that's traditional and one that's tied to an industrial model, and so one that adopts the types of assessments that are traditional type assessments, then of course you would be on the side of wanting a proctored exam all the time and so on. But if your system is changing to one where it's the philosophy behind it is one of collaboration, is one of 21st century society, and it's one of where you're looking at these different skill sets and competencies, the nature of your assessment would tend to be different. And so, yes, I think then you wouldn't, of course, have to think about how do we approach this kind of assessment? How do we get this authentic assessment? And the other part of that is, how do we use these assessments for not just as summative assessments to end it all? How do you use the assessments as learning and for learning? So to me, it's not just an issue of siding. It's an issue of that whole consideration of where you want to go, what is your philosophy, and what is best suited to achieve the outcomes in that context.
So we have some questions coming in from social media. So we have one from Nicholas Mendez. So I'm just going to throw this out to the panel because it really is a valid question for everyone to consider at any level. In the traditional model, primary school students spend 6 to 7 contact hours with teachers. However, this may be unrealistic in a virtual mode. So what does the panel recommend on this?
I would recommend planning and designing proper online learning from the start. And planning and designing proper online learning from the start will ensure that you don't end up with 6 to 7 contact hours necessarily, because you'll be planning based on what you've defined the students need to achieve.
Right.
And I'll stop there.
So it's not meant to say that this is the case, that this is how much time is spent. It's just from a viewer, meaning that it's a lot of time.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, that if you plan from upfront, and that's the idea behind it, that right now we're in the mode of just trying to make sure that our students get an education, but that's not the ideal. And I think, and so the ideal would be to sit, and I think that's why Mr. Brooms was suggesting that parallel system. So you don't hold and plan, you plan as you go along with the remote teaching. You are planning on the side, okay, how do we approach this in a systematic way with the quality that we want? Because this is an issue of quality and effectiveness.
Yeah.
And to me, that requires upfront planning.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ms. Ramatali, would you like to chime in? Oh, I'm sorry, Diana, your mic was unmuted. Please go ahead. So this is the importance of those non-gestural cues. You know, in real life, somebody would lean forward. So I have to look at the mics. Please go ahead, Diana.
Okay, I just wanted to agree with Dr. Dan that we need to plan, and in our lesson plans, we can use different materials. So even though we don't want our kids on the screen for 6-7 hours, we can develop activities where they can go off and create something. It may be on their books, they can go sit under the tree, you know, but you don't have to all create something where you have to go on Google Classroom and type out something. You may have a drawing, you may have them do a poem, anything. You can bring in the arts basically and have them create materials to answer questions. So that takes away from being on the computer all the time.
So I would now throw out the same cue to Ms. Ramatali now. Yes, please go ahead.
I would like to agree with both, you know, Dr. Diane and Diana, in terms. um, the one thing parents who don't understand, for instance, they want their children to be taught, and some of the parents, in terms of quality, they believe that if a teacher teaches for 2 hours, they be some of them are complaining that the children are being shortchanged without understanding. So I think we need to communicate to parents the difference between face-to-face, teaching and online teaching. And if we can communicate and plan ahead and involve parents in the communication of what it is all about, I think parents will have a better understanding. So that is from my experience with dealing with parents. And at this point in time, also from parents who will be calling me for advice and complaining about teachers, I would give them that kind of advice as well. And from our own research, as when we were preparing, I researched, presenting a 60 minutes presentation in face-to-face. You must now cut it down to about 30 minutes. So we understand, the challenges of doing research and the difference of presenting online in comparison to Facebook.
Dr. Descartes, please go ahead.
I also just want to add, yes, there is the planning that's involved, but we have children at different ages, and the number of hours of screen time would vary depending on the age of the child. In addition to that, we also have, when you think of 6 to 7 hours, and when I recall my primary school years, I cannot recall formal education being for 6 to 7 hours per day. So there were different things that were taught, and I know Diana and Diane alluded to that. So virtual learning has to be more innovative. What do we do to engage our students? Rather than a 6 to 7, we break it down, or we have maybe 3 hours, but we ensure that we have those activities where students, we can keep their attention. So these are just some of the things that come to mind. In addition to that, it may take a little while before we get the research to guide us in the proper planning, but one of the things we need is that research to help us in planning our teaching in the best way possible.
I'm hearing all the beautiful keywords for cross-disciplinary research, just chiming away here. So what you guys are mentioning would be things like gamification, where if you look at, so this basically means where you can apply game design-like qualities or guidelines in a learning context so that it becomes fun, becomes more engaging. And once you have those activities laid out, whatever somebody has to learn or the order that they have to learn it, you then put in fun bits and pieces, right? So exactly what you said, Dr. Descartes. Kids, when they go to school for 6-7 hours, they don't spend that time learning. They're in recess. They're in the lunch, wherever they have lunch, and they play, and they engage, and they have fun, and they chat, and that whole interaction is vital. Yeah, because there's the idea of busy work, where you think you're doing something useful, but you're just being busy. So in computer science, we tend to make our operating systems be super busy in the right way. And it's probably a misconception that the same thing has to apply in real world, right? There's that 80-20 principle, where just a fraction of really concentrated work produces the majority of the effects. So Diana's presentation shared some of these tools that, could bring in that fun element to really soften the impact of sitting behind the screen and looking at this. Kids might leap off the chair. Adults too, not so fast, but we'll do it. And, you get up and you move. So very important point here. I'd just like to pose another question from our viewers. This is by going. Oh, yes, Mr. Brooms.
Oh, yeah, I need to weigh in on this one.
Please do.
Oh, yes. The public will be surprised as Mr. Ramat Ali spoke about parents not understanding that 2 hours in a physical classroom and 2 hours online, you can't equate them in any way. we'd be surprised to know that we have some officials who don't understand that either. And yeah, we've had a lot of issues coming to the association about teachers being asked to spend, in some instances, all day online in sessions, which must be, viewed as what it is. I have to be very politically correct here. So education, we need to educate. We need to educate at all levels. We may think it's parents that need to be educated, but that's not true. We need to educate above and below. We have research and we have policy determining how much time should be allotted for a class for different levels. Yet we are seeing where in some instances teachers are being asked to teach more than the time allotted to face-to-face teaching online. Online teaching, remote teaching, V-learning, however we classify it, is not taking physical school online. It is simply not that, but many persons seem to think it is. So it is something that we need to disabuse the minds of many members of our population about. And I am happy that it was brought up here today, because we have very reputable persons saying it, so that when tutor says it as well, we have the backing of this esteemed panel.
Well said, well said. So you bring up an interesting point here where the policy has to fit with the identity, right? And perhaps the assessment mechanisms, not what we use to assess learning, but how we assess what works for us has to match our identity. So please stay right here, Mr. Brooms. I know you're right, but still. We have a question coming in that I'd like you to tackle. This is from Fahim Mohammed. He asks, is there a risk to our Caribbean identity as a result of moving to online learning, especially across boundaries? So that whole idea of what is our identity and being forced to adopt things that might be a mismatch, perhaps. Other panelists, please feel free to weigh in.
I'm not sure which parts of our identity or perceived identity we are going to lose by going online. But as was said before, proper planning ensures that what we want the children to get, they will get. If we do this without the proper planning, we are going to make mistakes that will not be easily corrected, if at all. So preserving identity is in our hands. We don't have to depend on anybody outside of this situation to help us to preserve the identity. Once we are clear about what we want to impart to the children, once we do the proper research, then preserving our identity should be quite easy.
Yeah, I think, if I may, I just want to bring in, I think I mentioned it before, today's World Quality Day, right? I mentioned that, right? Did I?
World Quality Day?
If I didn't, I'm mentioning it now. Today's World Quality Day. But Mr. Brooms, I agree with you totally. And one of the things that we need to think about, and this is me with my quality hat now, plan, do, check, act. If we do the planning, and I'm agreeing with Mr. Brooms, that's critical, and we implement our online learning, and we ensure we have the checks and balances, the checking, because if you're talking about that thing of whether or not we are impacting our cultural identity, we have to do that checking. So we plan, we implement it, we do that checking, which is part of our evaluation. And then we act on it. So if we see in doing it, we haven't taken into consideration our philosophy that we had hoped. We then at the end make the adjustment and we come back again. So my thing is, apart from the planning, you have to apply that framework that involves not just the planning, but also the implementation, the evaluation, and the remedial actions when things go awry. So I just wanted to add that part.
Thank you for that, Dr. Nkosi. So we have one last question and then we wrap up this wonderful discussion. So this one comes from Fahim Mohammed, from Mikhail Adbir. And he asks, virtual learning requires some sort of supervision. How do we address situations of lack of supervision in terms of homes where both parents are working, or in the case of single parent homes where pre-pandemic it was already stressful? So this is a tough question because I'm not going to comment here. I'm going to throw it out to the panel and mine your knowledge. Crowdsource.
That sounds like Dr. Descartes' question.
Throw it on me.
It does. Consensus. Yes, consensus.
This is indeed a difficult one. Supervision. Now, we supervise our children, we monitor our children, we teach them certain skills, we teach them how to behave, right? And the reason why we do that is because our children model our behaviors. We expect certain behaviors. And when we're not present, we do continue to expect the behaviors that that we expect our children, or the ways that we expect our children to behave. So if we set certain standards within the home, right? And that's to say we have a child who we've groomed, we've taught in a certain way to behave. These expectations, we do hope to continue if we're absent. However, and I will stress that no child under the age of 18 should be left unsupervised. We have to find a way to put in place some level of supervision for our children. And so having said that, if there is someone there with a child who's probably in a virtual learning, in a virtual classroom, we would need to have someone there just to cast an eye, just to be around that child. If the child is older, of course, it's easier, but younger children definitely need to be supervised. But just going back to what I said, the ways that we've taught our children in terms of how to behave, we expect those behaviors if our backs are turned. And that is what the role of the parent, or that first place in terms of where socialization begins, is so critical, particularly during this pandemic. We have that responsibility as parents. We have to take charge of that responsibility to ensure that that lifelong socialization continues in the way that is healthy for those children. And that's how I see it. The burden may be on the parents, but it is what it is. We have to take on that responsibility.
Fair enough. And it also includes flexibility in the workplace for parents who are working from home, as well as, just the general, what's the word here? I'm lacking my words. The uncertainty of
uncertainty,
how
and that's why, and not to cut you short, but that's why we have those IR in terms of those IR policies put in place to ensure that parents can spend their time with their children if they have to. Okay.
Yes.
So that's it.
Thank you so much. So we are spot on out of time. Thank you very much, panelists, for engaging and contributing your knowledge, your perspective, your guidance, your advice, everything that makes it starts the ball rolling. So as viewers, thank you. We can't see you, but I know you see us. Thank you very much for contributing and enriching our discussion. So there are some questions floating in, but we're out of time. So thank you again for this opportunity. And I'd like to pass back now to our chair, Dr. Dyer, to help us come to a virtual close.
Thank you, Phaedra, and thank you for your expert moderation today of this panel discussion on online teaching. And it bids ask, will our children even remember what it is like to be in a real classroom when this is over? This generation has had a difficult time keeping still. Those of us who are teachers know when you have a child sitting in your class, it's difficult to keep them entertained and looking and paying attention. So what will happen to us? Chalk and talk, I think, is dead. And we really do need to think about blended learning and what we will do. I, for one, have learned a lot today. I never knew about Edpuzzle, even though I'm a lecturer here at the university. I teach mathematics, which most people scream and run out the room when I say, but Pear Deck and Loom, well, these are things that we really need to learn about and see if we can implement them in our classes. So we just want to thank all the speakers from this afternoon session for taking the time to be with us today, even though it's a virtual space you're sharing with us. And of course, again, our expert moderator. I have learned a lot from observing your moderation of this panel discussion. Special thanks also go out to the organizers of this afternoon's proceedings. Dr. Terry Mohammed, Mrs. Laura Rambaran Sipasad, all the people in the background from the UE Marketing and Communications Office and the FST IT team that's always there present, and our silent facilitator, who's the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology, Dr. Brian Coburn. I know you're here listening to everything. And in closing, we have to just remember a few keywords: strive to survive and thrive effectively. I learned that today from our principal. The side effects of social distancing, well, that is food for thought. And I have to see if I can come up with my own egg drop activity, something to keep our children entertained. And we will see, can we really reduce that digital divide? And that is our goal, that's our aim. And we hope to accomplish that. And certainly at the Faculty of Science and Technology, it has been our pleasure to be here with you today. And we do wish you happy virtual teaching, those of you who have classes to go and prepare, and a pleasant good afternoon to all.